Hi everyone, this is part 8 of my series on Jesus called First Blooms. I'm going to talk about what effect Jesus had on people immediately after his death. What kinds of communities and beliefs and responses bloomed and flowered right after Christ died before the Catholic Church formed. This series on Jesus is designed to be listened to in order. I've got a link in the description below to the first video in this series, and my website is up there on the screen if you'd like to check out my books of poetry and essays about spirituality, culture, science, the whole kit and caboodle. Okay. All right, so in the last video called Soil, I talked about how as a child or youth, quantum physics and my own dreams sort of tipped me off to the strangeness and vastness of reality beyond our society's conventional ideas about it. And particularly I talked about encountering Seth, which is an entity channeled by Jane Roberts, and how that affected me. Seth, I said, spoke with this sort of vastness, authority. It's hard to put into words, but if you go check out that last video, I hope that helps. Okay, that's my intro leading into this next section here. First blooms. And I'm referring to this power of Seth when I say this now. That a similar power, or personality, or spirit, comes through the four Gospels after 2,000 years of human meddling is yet another Christ-related miracle. The layers of obfuscation and uncertainty that lie between Christ and the religion that claims his name are reminiscent of the famous pile of mattresses between the pea and the princess. For starters, our four canonical Gospels were written in Greek, whereas Jesus almost certainly spoke Aramaic. This means any quotation of Jesus in English is a translation of a translation. Where English versions of the Gospels use the word sin, for example, the Greek word was almost always hamartano, which meant something closer to a mistake or just missing the mark. Who knows what Aramaic word Jesus himself used? Further distancing us from the source, the Gospels were all written between 30 and 80 years after Jesus died by unknown authors who had never met the man. The versions we now have of each Gospel were pieced together from multiple copies, none of which were in complete agreement with any other, and all of which were themselves several generations of handwritten copies removed from the originals. Over the centuries, imperfect human scribes made hundreds of changes, some by accident, and some in service to theological and social agendas. Nor were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John the only Gospels on offer. The four we've gotten used to were hand-picked by early bishops from a larger pool of Gospels that most Christians never get a peek at. There were also numerous epistles, acts, apocalypses, and other Christ-related writings that didn't make the final cut into the book that would receive the official stamp of the New Testament. Far from falling out of the sky into the hands of delighted clergymen, our New Testament developed over 300 years of intense debate from a hotbed of diverse, passionately held beliefs about Jesus. Between about 60 and 400 CE, certain determined church leaders slowly hammered out an orthodoxy, which literally means right opinion, and cast other beliefs into the infernal pits of heresy, which comes from the Greek word hierein, to choose. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that Greek word right. But heresy actually comes from a Greek word meaning to choose. Well-intentioned or not, men such as the bishops Irenaeus and Tertullian were keen to unify, limit, and standardize what historian Elaine Pagels calls the enormous diversity of beliefs that Jesus' presence inspired in the ancient world. Various Christologies, or what we could call theories of Jesus, developed. Marcionites believed that the angry God of the Old Testament was a different God from the loving one that Jesus represented. Adoptionists believed Jesus was born human, but was adopted by God at his baptism. Docetists believed Jesus was purely divine and only appeared human to mortal eyes. Arianism held that Christ was born from the Father and therefore distinct from and subordinate to God himself. Gnostic Christians, armed with their own Gospels, tended to see Jesus as primarily a spiritual symbol for their personal reunion with a divinity inherent in themselves as well as Jesus. People calling themselves Christians believed in as many as 365 different gods. Many encouraged prophesying and speaking in tongues, believing that an authentic Christian contributed their own original visions, myths, and interpretations to a kind of ongoing mystical tradition. Some groups, following Christ's lead, allowed women as much participation and authority as men. The idea that there was one original church that has since branched into many sects couldn't be more wrong. Instead, there were many sects that were squeezed into one church, which later resplintered to some extent. If Jesus was rain, his earliest admirers were like various species of wildflowers, exuberantly sprouting across the ancient world. Thanks for listening. Hope you'll leave comments, like the video, and subscribe. The next video in this series is called Pruning, and I'm going to explore some more meaty history and talk about how this early, exuberant, diverse blooming was pruned and contained and standardized into what we now know as the Catholic Church and Christianity in general.